Hello and welcome to this damnful idealistic crusade. This video is just going to be a very short and simple run through of all the various used books I picked up. Most at our local McKay's used bookstore, which is a small bookstore chain that's in the Tennessee, Kentucky, southeastern areas with a number of locations, which each of those stores is just a massive black hole of wondrous books for dirt cheap and extreme discount prices, which for me means I go in there and trade in like a book or two and come out with another 40 because I have problems. But you can't put film books or other books in front of me for less than $1 because I'm going to buy them, even though I already don't have space on any shelf whatsoever. These first ones are titles I've meant to pick up. This is one of several of the Batman prose novels that I've been meaning to read for ages. I've finally decided to try and get through the rest of these, so I've reread the ones I have from the early 90s. This was the next one, entitled The Ultimate Evil. It's an interesting book. I did get the chance to read through this, and it's definitely a very dark, different subject matter, not your typical Batman story. I think it actually starts out pretty well, but about halfway through the book, it kind of goes off on a tangent. But again, the subject matter is extremely dark, and it's interesting to see Batman in such a different light. This is the first edition hardcover, which has this miniature dust jacket that's sort of in a brown paper wrapping. So it's an interesting design. It's cool that I was able to pick up the first edition hardcover for, super cheap. And usually these books go for quite a bit simply because they have Batman on the cover and they've not really been reprinted. And, it's a little bit more expensive usually than your typical, paperback or, forgotten novel from the 90s, but simply because it has Batman in the title. But very happy I'm finally chipping away at these. Next up are 4 later Batman paperbacks. The first one is entitled The Stone King, which was done by Pocket Books in about 2002, I believe. I think this, since it's under the Justice League title, I think it was supposed to be part of a series with novels featuring the other famous characters, and I do believe there are a couple books, but they didn't really go beyond 2 or 3 volumes. This is the one that is the single Batman volume. And then these 3 are under Del Rey. Dead White, Inferno, and Fear Itself, each an original story by a different author. I'm familiar with Michael Reeves because he did a number of Star Wars Expanded Universe books, and all 3 of these were done 2006, 2007 in the Batman Begins aftermath when there was a renewed interest in the character. They seem to have tried to do a couple novels to, ride the coattails of Batman Begins. So I've always meant to read these. I'm going to be very excited to tear into them and see if they're really good Batman tales, because I always get the impression that as good as a comic can be, I'm much more of a prose reader, so I always wish I could get a fleshed out version in novel form sometimes of a really good comic story. And I feel that Batman could be a great character for, doing more in a novel type setting. And there's not a lot of Batman novels, so I'm really excited to finally tear into all the other ones. But you have to chip away at these and track them down, and usually, again, it's going to cost you $5 or $10 per book simply in a used shop because it's got Batman in the title. Whereas if it didn't have Batman in the title, it'd be, a buck or two. Of course, it wouldn't be me without some movie tie-ins, and of course, ironically, as soon as I finished and uploaded that video I did on the film novelizations I already own, lo and behold, I start finding a few more here and there. So here are the next 4 that I've come across. The oldest being the novelization of the film The China Syndrome, which is one of the great 70s thrillers, and I hadn't even realized it had a novelization. I saw this on the shelf and thought, oh, it was based on a book. I hadn't realized that. And I'm like, wait, no, this is actually based on the screenplay. So this is a novelization. So, of course, cheap novelizations, I'm going to grab it. This next one is one I've wanted to read for ages. This is David Morrell's First Blood, which, of course, is what the Rambo series was based on. And the novel's a lot different, a lot darker, and has the original dark ending, which they shot but didn't use for the original First Blood film. So this, of course, is a Fawcett reprint to tie in with the film series success. It's a little dinged up, but it was a nice copy for $0.25, so I now can finally read this. I've meant to for ages, simply because I was always interested when Morel would talk and some of the extras on the various Rambo DVDs and such. First Blood is the only film I really like of the series, so I've always wanted to read the novel, so this is a great way to do that. Next up is the novelization of the 2003 Hulk film, which did have some interesting ideas I kind of always enjoyed, but I never thought the film was all that great. I just thought it was a giant mixed bag. And the real reason why I picked this up is it's written by Peter David, who wrote the Batman Forever novelization I'm absolutely mad about. He did the Spider-Man novels. He wrote a bunch of great Star Trek novels. And just as an author, I really enjoy reading his work. So I'm curious to see what he did with the 2003 Hulk film. And it's, as you can see, it's definitely on the thick side compared to these others. So I'm hoping he took these ideas and ran with it like he did on Batman Forever. And then last, I found a nice, cheap, oversized copy of the first Abrams Star Trek film. The reason why I picked this up is it's written by Alan Dean Foster, who is one of the great novelization authors, great science fiction author, who I primarily know for ghostwriting the Star Wars novelization and technically the first continuation novel, and it was originally supposed to be the low-budget sequel if Star Wars wasn't successful, which turned into the novel Splinter of the Mind's Eye, which I read, 100 times growing up. So if I see he writes a novelization, it's just like Peter David, I'm going to pick it up if it's a decent price. And all of these were, under 50 cents. So, of course, I just immediately bought all of them. Next, we move into film history and criticism titles. So this is a mixture of really interesting books that I've either wanted to read, didn't know about, or meant to pick up copies of. And again, you put me in a room with film books and you say that these are all, $1 or under, I'm going to buy all of them. So this is a really interesting title called Fox That Got Away, which is about pretty much the end of the original days of 20th Century Fox, with Darryl Zanuck leaving and then Richard Zanuck taking over and then Darryl Zanuck coming back and then eventually Zanuck getting ousted the second time, and basically the end of the primary iteration of Fox that we all think of. So this is pretty much the final days of those times, covering the 60s into the 70s, and it's a really interesting period. Again, not often that a studio mogul would leave and come back and fire his own son, which I always thought was really bizarre. So yeah, I'm interested to check this out because I was not aware until finding this that there was a book covering specifically the late period of Fox. This is, of course, Donald Spoto's Art of Alfred Hitchcock, which is the good Hitchcock book that he wrote. This is just about the films and a nice critical work. I do have the first edition, so this is the more common updated version. I think this is from about 1991 or so, and it's got, updated on the cover, but it's got new photos. It's a super minty copy and in paperback, so I can carry it around if I feel like it. And again, it's just sometimes there are certain books I think it's cool to have multiple editions because they completely change all the stills around. And again, this is a completely revised version, so I'm going to check it against my first edition to see if there's any text differences. Again, this is a much better book than Dark Side of Genius, which just makes up a bunch of crap and has unfortunately become the de facto standard classroom textbook on Hitchcock, which is ridiculous because it literally makes up a bunch of junk. And this is the book you should stick with if you want to read a Spoto Hitchcock book. This next one is a critical work comprised of a bunch of different essays on the Hollywood Renaissance period, which I am completely obsessed with, and any new work I can find about that specific, glorious period, late 60s to the mid to late 70s, I'm going to tear into. So it just looked like a lot of fun. And these critical works on small university presses are usually very expensive. So if I see a paperback like this in nice shape and it's on a topic like that from a university press for $1 or $2, I'm just going to go for it, even if, I only read it once and just trade it away. At least it's definitely a lot easier doing that than spending $30-$40 on these university press titles. Next up are some more critical works or works about specific films. This first one is a title in the Cinema One series, which all have this uniform paperback design from the 70s and 80s with the lovely black spines, and they're all numbered. I've read a number of these, but they are somewhat collectible, so usually when you find them, regardless of shape, they're, between $5 and $15 or more per title. Usually, most of the information in them has been covered other places, unless it's a much less, trying to think of the right word, much less popular director or personality. So there are a number of books like this one where it's a particular individual who's not been covered nearly as much as they should be. So it's like a quasi combination between biography and critical analysis piece, but I couldn't pass this up. It was a copy. This is the book written on Ruben McGilligan, who is a really underrated director of the classic period. Did a number of really great, iconic, interesting films, and the more of his work that I see, the more I just come away impressed. So I was really happy to find this, and I'm going to dig into it. But most people, I'm trying to think what his most well-known title would be. It's probably the 1932 Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde with Frederick March, which of course he won his Oscar for. It's one of the great pre-code horror films, and again, anything with a horror connection is going to be more well-known today, even though you say horror and 99% of people don't know classic horror, but they say they're horror fans. But anyway, I'm excited to dig into that. This next one is one of those where they literally just republished the script of a film, but I picked it up because it's of the film Andersonville, which John Frankenheimer did. It's a made-for-television film, but you can pick it up on DVD, and the production values are phenomenal. And it's one of the 1990s Civil War era productions that tried to do the historical period setting justice, and of course, I believe had some Turner backing. And Ted Turner was really big in the 90s into the 2000s about trying to bring back Civil War films and Westerns and such. And of course, he helped to bankroll Gettysburg, and that's why it was so long and had a theatrical release. So I picked this up simply because John Frankenheimer wrote the foreword, and I'm a giant John Frankenheimer nerd. So of course, it was 50 cents, and I'm probably not going to read the screenplay all that much, but the front chunk is a Frankenheimer foreword, so I bought it. And then this third one is a really good title I've read a library copy of before, titled Mad as Hell. Of course, it's about the making and legacy of the film Network, the 1976 Sidney Lumet, Patty Chayefsky masterpiece that is one of the most prescient films ever made about the rise of what we now know as mass media culture. There aren't really any other books on the film. There are the nice making of documentaries and commentary on the DVDs and Blu-rays, but this book goes into some nice detail that isn't always covered by those, so it goes hand in hand with the extras. So if you're a huge Network fan, you've probably already read this. If you haven't, definitely check it out. It's definitely worth your time. Next up, a television and music book. This was a real surprise find in the bargain bins. This is titled the 50th Anniversary Tribute book, but it's a companion/critical piece about the Twilight Zone when it celebrated its 50th anniversary. There's, of course, the really great companion volume that talks about every single episode in detail, which I would love to get a copy of that. That Twilight Zone book companion is really phenomenal, but I wasn't even aware this particular book existed, and I'm sure it covers some of the same ground as the companion book, but it just looked like a really nice tribute book and has involvement from the Serling family. So I was like, I'll read it. I can geek out over Twilight Zone stuff. And again, you put media books out for 50 cents. I'm going to buy them. This next one is Johnny Marr's autobiography. Of course, Johnny Marr, most famous for being the guitarist of the Smiths. And I'm a sucker for really good, juicy music biographies, particularly autobiographies, written by the people who were there. And this is quite a thick volume. So I figured, why not? And I always need stuff to read, particularly since with COVID going on, the libraries have reopened, but it's probably not something I'm probably not going to be going to the library anytime soon, simply because, the trading stuff in and out, and already you have to always make sure and wash your hands when you handle library books. But with COVID, that adds a whole other layer. So I'm definitely going to probably be buying more used books cheap than I would normally, simply because I'm probably not going to the library for a long while. Next up are some really interesting oversized titles. So these don't really fit on shelves, but also film history, biographies, same sort of genre, but again, they're all oversized. This first volume from 1997 is entitled The Casablanca Companion. This is one of the books that basically goes more into historical background and details and trivia and such. And of course, 97 is when you could still do books like this because most people still didn't really get on the internet all that much and information was not as readily available. But it's an interesting looking volume, not super common. And as a Casablanca geek, of course, I'm going to read it. But yeah, it's just filled with information and literally is quite thick. So it's got a lot of stills and different things. So looked like an interesting title to pick up. And since I've read practically every book on Casablanca I can get my hands on, it was a no-brainer to grab this. Next up is a really lovely volume. This is the revised, updated version of the films of Sean Connery, written by Lee Pfeiffer and Philip Lisa. Lee Pfeiffer I know from a lot of James Bond reference work, and I've seen copies of this book before, but not this revised version, which apparently is rather uncommon. This, of course, is a nice chronological run-through of all of Connery's starring roles, with some really nice critical text about each film in addition to background, and it's loaded with stills, and of course includes a section on every Bond film that he did. But it's a really nice volume. It's definitely uncommon, and it's this nice condition, oversized book. It's the updated version, so this runs all the way through Finding Forrester, which ironically is pretty close to when Connery retired. So it's like if this could have gotten to and also included League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, then it would sadly have been complete. But Connery is such an underrated actor that I've been trying to see all of his film performances, or the ones that are readily available that I just haven't gotten to yet. And I always feel like I get rewarded somehow because he's one of the most underrated actors we've had, and still I don't think gets his due for being such a phenomenal dramatic actor. So this is a nice tome to go along with that. And again, I'm a sucker for these really handsome volumes, especially when they're dirt cheap. And I know this one in particular is not very common, so you'll pay at least probably $10 to $20 for a copy on eBay. I saw this on the shelf for 75 cents, and there was no way I was not leaving it. This is a Life in Pictures on Katherine Hepburn, and again, it's one of those books that's much more of a photo montage album than a biography, but there are some elements of biography, primarily in the form of a lot of quotes from Hepburn herself. So it's a lot of, witticisms and life observations and such. But it's a gorgeous looking book with really great printing and huge stills. So again, it's very lovingly put together. I couldn't believe this was on the shelf for 75 cents. So I was like, I have no need for this, but it's gorgeous. So I'm just going to get this because I already have too many books. What's one more? My only issue with this is the foreword is written by Charles Higham, and not really a fan of his since he wrote the Errol Flynn biography that basically made up the idea that Errol was a Nazi, and that got stuck in people's heads for a while, even though that was completely fabricated. And I know he's written stuff since then that's supposed to be a lot better, but that's accusing somebody of that is kind of hard to get over in terms of writing biographies. So that's one of the names if I see on something, I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to skip that. But again, I, from what I've heard, his later works are much more factual. But again, that something like that is kind of hard to forget about. So, but he just wrote the foreword. But anyway, just a beautiful looking volume. The cover's a little crumpled on the top, but again, it was less than $1, and it's really heavy and thick, and just really nicely put together. Not really necessary, but definitely a coffee table display book piece. But again, it was less than $1. This is a really interesting piece I wasn't aware of. This is titled the "It's a Wonderful Life" book, but It's kind of done in the way that they used to do books about films, and they would call it a scrapbook, or characters or various pieces. So books from the 70s, 80s would be in a scrapbook type format, where it'd be a bunch of pictures and then a lot of interviews and special text pieces that remain exclusive to books like this. So the majority of this book is actually the printed screenplay of the film, which is why it's so thick. But it does have a lot of nice stills. But the reason why I picked this up is there are some interview pieces exclusive to this with Jimmy Stewart and Frank Capra. A lot of text by Janine Basinger, who is one of the Capra experts and did the Criterion commentary track on the Laserdisc release for the film. So this is really the only book there is, ostensibly completely about It's a Wonderful Life, even though, the actual sections on the film are only, a section of the book, and the rest, the bulk, is taken up by the printing of the screenplay. But again, the printing is lovely, and it's not just stills from the film, but it's production stills as well. And the pages have kind of yellowed on the edges over time, but the overall condition is really excellent, and this is a very uncommon book to find. And again, because it's a paperback, I'm sure most copies of the spine is going to be shot. This one, it's still in nice shape, but it's also got some nice drawings. It's got some pre-production materials, which is really cool, some vintage articles, and some actual original studio letterhead and paper materials reprinted here, and then publicity releases, and just really, really nicely put together. So I would say this is a nice essential piece for fans of the film. You'll just have to actually track down a copy. And this, of course, is the famous Capra photograph where he would get, they would get everybody from the majority of the cast and crew together and do a big group photo, which was done on most, if not all, of the major Capra titles. But yeah, really, really nice volume. Surprised I found it. Again, I wasn't aware of its existence. Next up is this giant tome entitled The MGM Story. This is a companion volume to the Warner Brothers story hardcover I have. They did a number of these based around the big major studios, and it's a big run-through of the major releases for each year. Ostensibly a complete listing, but I'm not sure if 100% if it is complete in all these books. This is the paperback reprint, so still the same as the hardcover version, but a little easier to cart around. These are really handsomely made, but you usually find them all beat up, and the pages have kind of yellowed. So I have the Warner Brothers one. I've had it for a number of years. I found this one. It's got a little bit of damage, but it's still this super heavy, beautifully put together volume, and it's quite heavy even in the paperback version. But if you've never seen one of these, let me show you what they look like. It's done by year chronologically. I mean, these are just gorgeous with lovely stills throughout that are beautifully printed. So even though this is, an older volume for sure, if you ever stumble across one of these and it's in good shape, it's definitely worth your time. And it's a beautiful reference work to have on the shelf and just pull off and thumb through, or read in the bathroom if you have nothing else to read. So yeah, I would like to get some of the other ones. Like I know there's one for RKO and Universal, but this was just a really nice conditioned copy. And again, it's a nice companion piece to the Warner Brothers one I have. And it was so cheap. I was like, I can't just let this sit here. Again, it was less than $1. So I was I was totally fully loaded trying to walk out of the store with just giant old books. Now, this one I could not believe was there. I was actually looking up a copy of this on eBay, trying to see if there was a cheap copy to buy, because I was really wanting to read this. This is Inside Star Trek, The Real Story, written by Herb Solow and Robert Justman, who were really two of the key creative personnel on the series. Herb Solow was basically the producer in charge at Desilu Studios, who got Star Trek and Mission Impossible sold to networks, and basically if it weren't for him, there would be neither show. And then Bob Justman was basically, the the linchpin producer in charge of most things. And between the two of them and Gene Roddenberry, of course, these three individuals were really what made the series work. And without any of these three, it would have just all collapsed. And in the retellings of the history and lore over the years, both of them apparently kind of got a little frustrated at how a lot of the history got rewritten, so they decided to finally write their own book and just literally tell it how it was. And that's literally what this book is. I could not put this book down. I read it in almost one sitting all the way through. It's quite thick. This is the paperback reprinting, which is really nicely done. It's got nice bindings, so you don't have to worry about not getting the hardcover. And even though this is from 97 and there hasn't been an updated version, it's still jam-packed with just stuff that I had never come across before. You have tons of printed materials. It's wonderfully put together, great stills, very easy to read in terms of the layout and everything, and it goes chronologically. There's a nice section even about the animated series and then the aftermath and the legacy of the series up to that point in 97. So for me, I've read a number of Star Trek making up books now. This goes hand in hand, I think, with the 50-Year Mission 2-volume interview books as like the de facto Star Trek book. Like if you're a fan and you haven't read this, you've got to read it. I know there's also the new book series, These Are the Voyages, which I really want to check out. There's a book for each season of the original series, but I think they're about $30 a pop, so I'm going to have to probably piecemeal those one at a time and get them from Amazon. But this is a wonderful book. And again, I was so surprised because I was literally going to buy a copy of this on eBay, and it was so nice to find one in the local bookshop for $1.50 because that saved me quite a bit. Now, moving on to just the straight biographies and autobiographies, I'm starting with these two, both written by Patrick McGilligan, who is one of my favorite biographers. His book on Hitchcock is the definitive Hitchcock tome. His book on Clint Eastwood is really exceptional and very revealing. Anytime I've read one of his biographies, I've always been very impressed. So I was very happy to find this is his book on James Cagney, which he wrote rather early on, and it's never been reprinted. So it's actually quite difficult to find. Believe this is from the early 80s or maybe even the late 70s. This is a paperback reprinting in really nice shape, and I'm obsessed with Cagney, as practically everybody should be. I've read his autobiography, Cagney on Cagney, which was great. But I'm really excited to read, an actual biographer's perspective, and especially McGilligan, who, again, is somebody whose biographies I've really enjoyed. And then this next one is his really great tome on Fritz Lang. I love the subtitle, Nature of the Beast. I've wanted to read this for a while, just, was going to read it in the library probably, and came across this really nice paperback printing, like the cover design and everything. Of course, you can tell the difference in how nice the cover looks over time compared to the much older volume. But very happy to be able to dig into these. And again, McGilligan is one of, I think, the best film subject biographers out there. Now moving on to all the rest, going alphabetically. This first one is a paperback of Anne Baxter's memoir, which, again, I hadn't even realized she had written one. And I've always loved her as an actress, so it just looked too interesting, so I picked up that. The next one is Charlotte Chandler's book on Joan Crawford, and Charlotte Chandler's written a lot of these pretty good biographies on a lot of notable figures. I have a couple of them, read a great number of them. And she always does a pretty great job at writing trying to find the right word, writing a good-sized biography that gets you a good idea about the individual, and they're all, about an average length, but none of them, go into super detail, and they're not, 600-700 pages long, like one of the really good, like one of the McGilligan books, for example. So I'm not sure if there's a better or more insightful biography on Crawford out there, but there's, of course, a number of books. But again, usually Chandler's biographies are a good starting point for any subject, because with a lot of these people, there's usually more than 3 or 5 different biographies out there. So sometimes you have to just pick a starting point. These next two are books on Henry Fonda. The first, entitled My Life, which is sort of done in an interview style format because it's ostensibly Henry Fonda recounting his life story to a biographer. And again, that may not necessarily be 100% accurate because it's the actual person recounting their life story. And, there's always the potential for people to, finagle some of the details and maybe make them look like, maybe make some things come off in a better light. And then I stumbled across this one, which I was not aware of. I like the title, Man Who Saw a Ghost. And so I will read both of these and compare and contrast them. And again, not sure what the best biography on Fonda is viewed as, because again, everybody's got a different opinion. If you look up the Amazon page for any book, it'll have 5-star reviews and 1-star reviews. There's usually no in between. Next, we have a really great thick-looking tome on Graham Greene. This is actually entitled Volume 3, so it's book 3 of a multi-volume biography series, and I have not read any of them. I don't have the first 2 books, but again, finding this lovely looking biography volume for, just a few cents, I was like, well, I can get this and hopefully get the others later. But again, I always loved Graham Greene's work and thought it'd be really interesting to learn more about his existence. This next one is a fun-looking book. This is Darrell Hammond's memoir, and again, being one of the all-time great SNL alums, I figured it would be a really, really fun read. And again, the title alone I thought was worth the 50 cents. Then I have this really great Peter O'Toole memoir, which again, you can't not love Peter O'Toole, so I figured just the anecdotes alone would be worth the read. This is one of Shirley MacLaine's later memoirs. She's written a number of them, and I've always loved her as an actress and personality, so I figured it'd be a fun read. Next up is the biography of Anthony Perkins entitled Split Image. Perkins, of course, known primarily for Psycho, and then was unfortunately forever typecast in the Norman Bates persona, and I've always wanted to know more about his personal life and backstory. I've always thought he was such an interesting character and a really great actor who unfortunately never got his due to that typecasting. So looked like a really interesting biography. And then this is Barbara Leaming's book on Orson Welles, which is one of the first positive, well-researched books on Welles there was. I do believe there was a little bit of involvement from Orson himself, and he said he was, kind of pleased at how it turned out. I've never actually read it. I've read parts of it or when it was quoted in other things. But yeah, this is, I think, generally regarded as like the first legitimately decent biography on Welles, although later releases have gone into a lot more detail, which brings us to Simon Callow's series of volumes of Welles biographies. This is volume 3, which covers Orson's later years. I've read volumes 1 and 2 before. Always wanted to get the lovely hardcover editions of these books and was very shocked to find one of the volumes in the bargain used bookstore. So, of course, I immediately snapped it up and now really want to get copies of volume 1 and 2. And then last, we have the autobiography of Faye Ray, who is a phenomenally underrated actress, most known, of course, for screaming her head off in King Kong. But when you dig into her film career, she had a lot of really great roles. The memoir written by her daughter about her relationship with her husband, Robert Riskin, the famous screenwriter, and really sort of early and primary partner of Frank Capra on most of the classic Capra titles, is really phenomenal required reading. So thought it'd be really cool to then read Faye Ray's biography in her own words. And then this last book is, of course, a biography on Darryl F. Zanuck, which I thought would be really cool to read going hand in hand with the End of Fox book. And I hadn't realized there was a full-on Zanuck biography out there. It's a bit older, so I don't know if there's more stuff that's come to light in the interim that's not in here. But anything about the moguls, that goes into more detail than the usual little tiny information pieces is, of course, like catnip to me. So this does it for the new books I've picked up, in the used shops and around. And it's just like they always seem to find me. I can't help it. But again, with COVID going on, it definitely helps to have stuff to do. So I think stockpiling some new books to read definitely is a helpful pastime. So I'm definitely going to get cracking away at trying to get through the rest of these. Hopefully you guys found something, to check out for yourself in this time period, or maybe something you read a long time ago or remember owning at some point. So until the next video, keep reading and keep always digging through your used local bookshops.